What a welcome. Opening Linguamania. Welcome to Linguamania, and this is Live Friday here at the Ashmolean Museum. This is the opportunity to share research with the wider public and enjoy a late night in the museum. Linguamania has been created by the research project team Creative Multilingualism here at Oxford. And Torch is the Oxford Research Center in the Humanities, and we support and facilitate multidisciplinary research and enable wider and public engagement. It is now my pleasure to introduce Scott Hale. Scott A. Hale is a senior data scientist analyzing large-scale data using techniques from computer science and other fields to answer social science questions. He has particular interest in human-computer interaction, collective action, and bilingualism. And Scott's talk will be on bilingualism and the internet. Thanks.
Great, thank you for coming. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm going to talk about bilingualism online and coming at it perhaps from a slightly different take of the traditional linguist, using some of my computer science knowledge and thinking about how we design platforms. How do we build platforms, build for bilinguals online? As a point of motivation, you might have heard this popular idea of filter bubbles, the idea that there's a lot of content out there, of course, on the internet. It's vast. It's actually very difficult to even enumerate and get an idea of how much content is there. But if you think about what you actually consume, it's a very small slice. And there's been a lot of discussion back and forth about how algorithms shape that content, how that content's personalized, so what I see in my Google search results could be different from what you see. But I want to take a step back from that and ask, what does this mean for language? Because even if we look at some of that literature on how information is different across ideology, for instance. Here's conservative bloggers and liberal bloggers, mostly linking to each other, very few linking across ideology. But of course we see the same thing if we take a step back and say, how about language? These are all bloggers writing about the Haitian earthquake in 2011, and in English, Spanish, and Japanese. And there's a few connections between these different languages, but by and large, of course, most people writing in English just link to other people writing in English. Most people writing in Japanese just link to others writing in Japanese. And it's not just blogs or anything, but this is something mirrored from platform to platform. So Wikipedia, we know that platform, yeah? So if we take Wikipedia as an example, English is the largest edition of Wikipedia. It's about 3 times the size of German, which by some accounts is the second largest. And you might think that, oh, well, it's probably like this. English just has everything in German and more, right? Well, no, actually not at all. The German edition, about half of the articles that are there have no equivalent in the English edition. And of course, given the size differences, there's even smaller overlap from how much of the English content is available in the German edition. And this is because people often contribute local content. They contribute their own knowledge to things. And so if you read about a place in a language where the language isn't spoken commonly in that place, you're very likely to be reading things third hand, things that reference sources, reference content that isn't written by locals, and that someone local hasn't written themselves. So, and it's not just the information, but of course, the information drives some of our behavior as well. So if this is from a colleague of mine in the department, Mark Graham, and he looked, just pick a destination. This is Tel Aviv. Search for a restaurant. Where might I go for lunch today? Oh, okay. How about if I search in Hebrew instead? Some overlap, a lot of different places. And if I search in Arabic, again, I get different places. And so the information online is again being used as input for all of these sources that we use. When you Google something on your phone, when you make a decision, all this is having an effect on what you see as available. And more broadly, we know that information is really important for innovation, discovering that something new. We have this idea that there's a light bulb moment of invention, and the sort of inventor locked away and toiling away into the night. Well, actually, most innovation, most creativity comes from taking something from one context and putting it into a different context. And so seeing that it's done something over there and then taking it into a new application, a new place. And of course, language is a huge divide in this way. And so I think it's very probable, although it's difficult to show empirically, that being able to take new ideas, new thinking from one area that maybe it's really common amongst one group of speakers in one language, but being able to apply that to a problem in another area could be a huge source of creativity. And so that drives my major research questions, which have been looking at how connected are we across languages, particularly on social media, and what are the roles that bilingual people play? Do they serve as bridges, right? Is there someone sort of reading content in one language, taking the popular ideas or innovative ideas and writing about them into a second language and introducing them to a new group of speakers? And doing this offline is quite difficult because the data just isn't there. But online, as we interact on social media, edit Wikipedia, tweet, Facebook, we're leaving behind digital data trails. And we can use that data to understand how people are behaving. And the first thing that pops out if we look at this data is the rate of bilingualism that we see. So bilingualism, offline by all accounts, survey evidence says it's really common. In fact, it's more common to find someone who speaks more than one language than it is to find someone who doesn't, who only speaks one language, by and large, across the world as a whole. However, if we look at some of the popular social media platforms, say Twitter, 11% of the users are contributing content in multiple languages. Wikipedia, about 15% of the active users are contributing, editing multiple language editions of Wikipedia. And so I think there's a lot that we can do yet to encourage people who are bilingual to actually contribute in their multiple languages. One last add-on there. So even somewhere like Catalan, the Catalan edition of Wikipedia, 35% of the people who edit that edition edit a second language edition as well. That is 65% of people who edit the Catalan edition only edit the Catalan edition. Although we know, of course, that there are high rates of bilingualism. Many of those Catalan speakers will speak at least a second language. So we can map out these languages and we can see how things connect together. And we can see that, okay, English is a very central language here, but there's some regional connections, language groups that live in close proximity to each other, or languages that share a more common structure or phonology to them. So the Romance languages have a number of connections between them of people who are contributing in both of those languages. And I said English is central, and you might think, well, if I know English, then I'm all set. I don't need to worry about this content in other languages. English is right there in the center. But if we actually look across these languages, and we have here the percentage of the number of users in a language on Wikipedia in this case, on the horizontal axis, and the percentage of those who edit multiple language editions, the vertical axis. And there's this really clear trend, right? If you're a big language, you primarily speak a large size language, something like English, very few people end up editing a second language edition. If you speak a much smaller language, then you're much more likely to be editing a second language. And part of this is just awareness of what's out there, the awareness of the limits of your language. There was a great study looking at Uzbek users online. They conducted a survey and they said, rate your foreign language skills. And by and large, respondents said, they're rubbish. I don't really do foreign language at all. And then in a different part of the survey, they said, how often do you access content that's not in Uzbek online? And lots of people accessed content not in Uzbek. They accessed English or Russian content primarily because they felt that there wasn't enough content available in Uzbek. So they knew that there were limits there to what they were seeing. And that's something we don't necessarily feel all the time in English. But in reality, English is a very special subset of the content available. And there is a lot of content that's not in English online. So that was a bit about bilingualism. Let me just go and ask for the bilinguals who are on these platforms. So that 11% on Twitter, 15% on Wikipedia. to what extent are they sort of sitting in these bridge positions? Are they able to take content from one context, one language, and introduce it into another context? And we can see that quite clearly if we look at Twitter. This is just as an example, but if we map out users, we look at how they mention, retweet each other, we look at the languages they use, particularly identify those users who are using more than one language, and then we can ask what happens if we take them out, and to what extent this network breaks apart and falls into multiple pieces. And I don't want to dwell on this, but the answer is that there's no one language in particular that is above and all responsible for this, but it's the combination of bilinguals across all these different pairs of languages that has the largest effect on holding that network together. And so bilinguals are sitting in these positions between different groups of language speakers online, and they're the glue that could hold things together. But a caveat to that, and we'll switch over to Wikipedia as an easy example to show this, but it holds on Twitter as well. Of course, on Wikipedia, when you have one article, you can look on the left side, you can see all the equivalent articles to that. And what happens if we look at what articles bilingual people edit when they edit more than one language edition, we get two distinct patterns. There's a group of people over on the left there who are editing completely different things in each language. So they might edit sport in Spanish, let's say, and they edit science in English, and never should the two meet. There are no articles that they edit in the same language. And then on the other hand, we have a group of bilingual people who are always editing the same articles across languages. And so if the article in language one needs an update, I'll go check it in my second language and I'll make that update there as well if needed. And so we have these two very different strategies that some bilinguals are bridging and working on the same content. Some are doing completely different things. And I just want to conclude with a couple thoughts to say that interface is really important to this and how we design our platforms, because unlike in the offline world, everything we do online is shaped, of course, by how the platform's designed. Everything is constructed. It's all man-made, all human-made. So that has a huge impact. And I won't go into this, but we can, in addition to looking at the data that's available online as people behave in the wild, we can run experiments and construct different interfaces and see how that affects behavior, and it does have a very large effect on behavior. And so I've been working, and some of the research has been put into practice to try to build interfaces that either make translation easier, that encompass the whole of the bilingual sort of experience, that can reward people for bridging across those languages, that can encourage them, make it easier to discover content or share that content across languages. This is a platform for translating social media content and sharing it more easily across languages. And so yeah, there's, I think, a lot we can do. And just, in the short time I have here, let me just summarize and say that, bilingualism is really common online. Really common offline, not so much online. Bilinguals are in these bridging positions. That is, that they're in position that they could spread content from one language into another. But there's mixed evidence to the extent that that actually happens, because of course people naturally do have different interests and may focus on completely different things in different languages. But above all, I think we need to better design our platform so that we can encourage people to be bilingual and use their multiple languages if they are, and help reward them for that. So designers, specifically, think about bilinguals when we build the next platform, the next Facebook, the next Twitter, the next Wikipedia. If you're bilingual, well, get out there, use your multiple languages. If you're multilingual, well, hey, never a bad time to start. Lots of resources, of course, but also find those bridge people. Find those people who are pulling content out of another language, who can tell you that something new that you're not going to see in your local nudie, that you're not going to get from your local group of friends, because it's something happening amongst a different group of people in a different context, a different language, and they can point you to it. And for all of us then, I think there's a real opportunity to try to just break outside of this sort of silo of our own language. So thank you very much for the time, and I'll be around for questions afterwards if you have anything. Thank you.